Good morning, everybody! It's a little strange filming a sermon in front of a camera instead of people, but I think we're going to be able to have some fun with it. Now, our series this summer is centered on heroes and when they fall. Now, today's hero is probably one that you didn't expect. It's going to be about Rachel. Rachel is an Old Testament character. She is the wife of Jacob. It's going to be a different kind of story today, but it's going to be an interesting one, I think, and it's going to invite us into the storytelling. Now, I love storytelling. It was baked into me at a young age. My dad would go on and on. He'd tell us tons of stories about his childhood, and I loved them so much. Some of my favorite stories, though, were about him and his dog, King. My dad would tell these stories about King that were extraordinary. He would tell us about how his dog would chase away the robbers and bandits that would try to steal things on the farm. He told me about this time when he fell into quicksand and King came and pulled him out. And even when King's story ended in a tragic way, my dad told it in such a dramatic fashion that I felt the pain and loss of that companion. The stories we love shape our expectations. And so when I got a dog growing up, I was expecting and hoping for a dog like King. My dog was nothing like King. Instead of a loyal companion, my dog would get just far ahead of you, look back, see that he'd gotten ahead enough, and bolt away. My dog loved to run away. My dog loved to eat the garbage and make a big mess. My dog didn't greet people nicely at the door. He would run and charge at them, barking his head off, which was always super embarrassing. My dog was not dependable. He was a troublemaker. And I loved him. Even though my dog didn't live up to the standard and expectations I had with the stories my dad told about King, I grew to love and cherish my own experience with a dog. And now I get to share these fun dog stories with my kids about my old dog who was a troublemaker. The expectations we get from stories shapes what we hope and long for in our own experience. So today we're going to take a little bit of time to ask ourselves what stories shape our expectations. And then we're going to look at Rachel's story and how her experience and her story doesn't meet any of those. In literature, some of my favorite stories are the hero's journey kind of stories. They usually start off with somebody who's just a normal, average person on the outside. Someone like Percy Jackson from The Lightning Thief, who's not a great student, doesn't have many friends. He just seems like a even below average person, but it turns out that he is special. He's got some amazing powers and gifts. Or you can take someone like a Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit. He's this round, middle-aged, pudgy little hobbit. He's small, fragile, weak, and he becomes this great character and hero in the story, and he's the pivot point on which success hangs. The hero's journey is one that goes from normal to rising and success. What sets heroes apart is that when they face tough circumstances, they don't give up. They rise to the challenge, and even when it looks like they're going to fail, with help, an unexpected victory comes, and the story ends with them winning the day. I love those stories, and those stories shape what I look for when I think about heroes. However, real people and heroes from literature don't often line up. We expect heroes to succeed. That's one of the defining characteristics of a hero. But in real life, heroes fail. In the Bible, heroes fail. One only has to look at King David, a guy who's called a man after God's own heart, one of the highest praises you could give someone in the Bible, and he messes up big time. Not only does he mess up, but the consequences of his actions reverberate throughout the story. And you see in the Bible that when people fall and mess up, it has real, tangible consequences. The difference between real life and the Bible and these hero journey stories that we have is that the Bible and real life have heroes who fall. When we read a Bible story, we don't expect perfect heroes. The hero in the Bible is somebody who's normal, but follows God. This biblical hero will face challenges, but with God's help, they rise above incredible problems. Now, I think that these are kind of the usual expectations that we have when we think about a Bible story and a hero. We expect them to be somebody who listens to God, and we expect them to rise and succeed over great challenges with God's help. And this is where we begin to look at Rachel's story, because Rachel does not match these expectations even. Rachel doesn't look like what the hero's journey does in our society, and Rachel doesn't look like a hero even in the Bible's kind of standards and expectations. First, Rachel is not a main character. Her story happens within Jacob's story. We're looking at chapter 31 today. Chapter 31 starts with Jacob, ends with Jacob, and Rachel's story and her actions happen right in the middle. Secondly, while Rachel does listen to God's call, she's not the one who's directly being called by God. Lastly, I think Rachel's actions in these stories, in the story of the idol stealing, don't seem to have any major consequences. You expect that her stealing and deceiving is going to end her up in some sort of bad position, and it just doesn't happen that way. When we don't see what we're expecting, that should give us a clue that we're dealing with a different kind of story. This isn't a typical hero's journey. This is something unique. Now, to help us kind of get our minds around this, I'm going to introduce you to two terms in literature or art. There's the term soft art or literature and hard literature. Hard and soft represent two different kinds of storytelling. Hard literature is often written to get a point across. When an author writes hard literature, they have a message and they want you to get that message loud and clear. Beside me, you can see an example of some hard literature or art. This is a poster of propaganda. There is not much wiggle room in how you're supposed to interpret this. This is clear and decisive, and it tells you who you should be considering an enemy and who you should be trying to save or be motivated by. Soft literature is different. Soft literature is more inviting the audience into an experience and allowing the audience to interpret what this story means to them. So here beside me is an example of some soft art. When you look at this, there is no clear message. It's expected that you look at it and allow the art to impact you and shape what you're feeling. Some of us will feel dark and brooding sort of sense, and others will feel maybe more a call to adventure. Soft literature excels at inviting us in and asking us to reflect on our own hearts and attitudes. So today's story I'm going to suggest is a soft story. This is a soft story because the emphasis is never made clear. The narrator never steps in and tells us what we should be learning. The narrator doesn't dwell on motive or reasoning. And the author doesn't comment, even when the author has opportunities to, even through characters. We are left in this place of ambiguity in this story. And that's clear signs, I think, that we're supposed to take this as a soft story. We're supposed to be feeling this one and trying to relate to what's going on. So let's do that together. In chapter 31, the chapter starts with Jacob hearing from God. God tells Jacob it's time to leave his uncle's land. Laban has been using Jacob for a long time. The relationship between Jacob and Laban is getting complicated, and now it's time to go home. It's interesting that in this story, it's Jacob who receives the calling from God, but it's Rachel and Leah who decide to follow. In community, this happens a lot. People in our community hear God's voice and calling. And we are put in a position, others are put in the position of listening to what God's calling others to. And we have to decide whether to follow or not follow. I have never really been a great follower. I've always been rather independent, wanting to blaze my own trail. But I have personally benefited greatly from being in community and hearing God's voice and call through my community. Jacob hears God's calling. Rachel and Leah decide to follow. If you're not in community, this is something that you will not experience. You won't experience what it's like to have God talk to you through others. So I'd really like to just invite you to connect deeper with the people in your community. This is a tough time because we're all separated, but that doesn't mean that we can't have communion with one another, that we can't be in relationship, even though it might be a bit different or awkward. So stay with this new format. Keep trying to reach out and connect, because you never know when God is going to call you through someone else. Leah and Rachel spend some time reflecting on Laban and what he's done. This is a really painful story because it shows a family that is broken. A family that is broken to the point of separation. These two daughters feel like they are ready to leave. The narrator does not explain why Rachel steals the idols in the next passage, but I think that we can understand what it means to take and steal in a situation of a broken relationship. When families break down, there is a strong push within to try and take as much as you can, to send a message through our actions. And I suspect that what Rachel is doing here is showing us that she is separating from Laban. Stealing is always an act of breaking. Rachel steals the idols and then she leaves. Laban realizes that Jacob has left. Laban catches Jacob, Rachel, and Leah and confronts them. He accuses Jacob of leaving without any notice, that he's been wronged because of this. And Laban asks, "Why would you steal my idols?" It seems that even Laban's not clear on why the idols were stolen. Jacob swears an oath. He tells Laban to search the camp, and whoever has the idols will be put to death. If this was a normal Bible story, we would expect that the idols would be found, and Jacob's oath, this reckless oath that he made, would have to be fulfilled, and Rachel would be killed. But this is not a normal story. Rachel is cunning, and she hides the idols in her saddle, claims to have her period, so she can't get up, and she deceives everyone. She gets away with it. This story doesn't end the way we would expect it. Rachel evades this terrible oath. She evades her terrible father, and that's the end of the story. Rachel's story of stealing the idols leaves us in a place of ambiguity. And I think it does this on purpose. First, because Rachel's story breaks these expectations, and this is much like real life. Real life doesn't tend to follow patterns and expectations. Life doesn't go in a straight line and check off all the boxes that we want to meet. Real life is filled with decisions and actions that don't have clear consequences or outcomes. But we don't make decisions and judgments based on clear outcomes. This story puts calling first. And I think calling is what we need to put first as well. Rachel hears God's call through Jacob, and she follows. You have a calling. You have a purpose and meaning in your life. And that comes first. Connected to this idea of calling, I think that Rachel shows us that calling and falling don't cancel each other out. Rachel responds to God's call and then right after goes and steals and lies. You know, you have a calling in your life. You have purpose and meaning, and that can't be canceled out by the poor decisions and actions and sins in your life. God is still there. And sometimes you can follow God, hear God's call for your life, pursue what He has for you, and also at the same time make bad decisions. God's calling on your life doesn't get canceled by the things that you've done or will do. And that's really good news because we all mess up. We all have things that we've done that have hurt others and ourselves. And it may feel like God is far away, and it may feel like you don't have God's call in your life, that you don't have meaning and purpose. But don't let go of that. Don't let go of God's call. Be like Rachel and continue to follow, even when you're doing things that are questionable at best. Lastly, I think we are left to respond. Right now, we all have painful relationships, just like Rachel and Leah. And just like Rachel and Leah, you may be in the midst of some sort of separation. But no matter what place you find yourself, remember that God is still with you. God is still active in your life, and God has a call for you. Life is never straightforward. It rarely meets what we expect, but it can still be good. It can still be something that is life-giving and something that brings joy, even if it didn't look like what you were hoping for.